What if the cure for cancer was lost in the mind of a young girl who's just been sold into a marriage? Think of all of that potential and opportunity that's just been lost forever. Imagine the lives that she could have saved. When I was 13 years old, I went to Mozambique in Africa, and it was there that I realized the importance of educational equality and how if these girls are just given a chance to reach that potential, they can change not only their lives, but your life, and quite possibly even the world. Good morning, TEDx. My name is Katura Halleday, and I am an advocate for educational equality. Now, I'm 17 years old, and I will admit to you guys, it has taken me most of my school life to realize just how privileged I am to have been even able to go to school, and how that's something that isn't applied equally to everybody. Now, despite the fact that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that every single person on this planet has a fundamental right to an education, there remains an estimated 130 million girls on this planet today between the ages of 6 and 17 who aren't in school. 130 million girls. For a second, I want you to just think about some of the achievements made by women. Consider the advancements in science, technology, and human rights that we can attribute to our amazing women throughout history. Barbara S. Askins, for example, she was a physical chemist and the woman responsible for improving the visibility of X-rays. Now, for most medical procedures nowadays, there is some form of X-ray that is necessary, and repeated X-rays are actually safe because of the work that she did. So if you know anybody who's had cancer, or if you know anybody who's even just broken an arm or a leg, you have actually been impacted by the education that Barbara S. Askins received. Without even realizing it, educational equality has affected you. Hedy Lamarr is another. Some of you might recognize her name from history. She is the woman, actor, and scientist responsible for the frequency hopping system, crucial for the development of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth technologies. Who in the audience could live without Wi-Fi and Bluetooth? I couldn't. I know that for a fact. And yet her inventions have allowed for this phenomenal international connection, collaboration, and communication. Today, you are able to walk out of here and call a loved one halfway around the globe. You are able to turn on your phone, and with a click of a button, you can see the world news. And while, admittedly, some of us might hate to actually talk about it, we can watch all those cat videos that we love so very much. And I think that's just as important in some cases. So again, without even realizing it, educational equality has affected you. Then you have people like Samia Suluhu Hassan. Now, she's the first female president of Tanzania, and she is the one who's responsible for making sure that country was actually able to outlaw child marriage. Now, that might not affect too many of you here, but I want you to stop for a second. And I want you to imagine that you are a 12-year-old girl in Tanzania, and you have just been sold into a marriage with a 50-year-old man. Think about how that might feel. Imagine the consequences. And let's not sugarcoat it here today. Sex without consent is rape, and that is going to be your fate every night for the rest of your life. Now imagine someone comes along and they make that marriage illegal and you are set free. Imagine how that must feel. That is the impact that Samia Suluhu Hassan's education has had on the world. That is what educational equality is able to do, and while it may not affect you, that is the reality of the situation. And educational equality is so very important because every single girl on this planet is born with a special skill inside of her. And too often that skill is lost to poverty. And there are so many different reasons as to why girls are kept out of classrooms. Sometimes it is because in countries they are treated as secondary parents. Sometimes it's because their gender designates them as laborers, mothers, child brides, or domestic workers. Sometimes it's because of economic stress on families. Other times it is because of distance from schools or crisis and conflict. And too often it's because these girls are stuck within this horrible cycle of intergenerational poverty. Now I know that 130 million girls is a big, big number. And that sometimes the system and the problem can seem so big and terrifying, we don't think we can solve it. But it's important to remember it's not just a few of us here and there against the problem. It is all of us. And you might feel young or inexperienced, but you can make an impact, I promise you. Because these girls don't need us to fly in and rescue them. They are brave, intelligent, and passionate young women, and they are more than willing to start making the positive impacts they need in their own communities. But as people with privilege, it is our responsibility to actually share that privilege and help give them the opportunity to become those change makers. We need to stop simply just giving out handouts and start building up these communities. And it's not impossible. You can all do something small to help any number of girls in any number of ways. You don't have to quit your job, sell your house and all your possessions and jump on the next plane to a developing country to build a school. They don't need that. They need you to just lend them a hand. And as I said, it's entirely possible because many hands really do make light work. Now, as I mentioned before, I was 13 years old when I went to Africa, and before that, I'll be honest, I didn't really understand my own privilege. Throughout my entire life, people had always tried to tell me, you are so lucky, you are so privileged, you have so much opportunity, and you have this duty to help other people. And I never got it. It never really clicked. And I can guarantee that pretty much every kid in this room has at some point heard their parents say, you don't know how lucky you are. And they're not always wrong. Because sometimes it can be really, really difficult to understand just how privileged you are unless you have seen the other side. Now, before I went to Mozambique, we actually decided that we would film a documentary of our trip, kind of a memento. And before we left, we decided we would actually get an interview with my principal. And something he said in his closing remarks has always stuck with me. He said, Katura, a life well lived in some way involves service to others. And that just kept replaying in my mind the entire 42-hour plane journey over. Now, when I got to Mozambique, we were actually volunteering at a school. And my role was to teach small art classes as well as help students practice their English. And consequently, you can imagine that I heard so many stories from all these different students. And I quickly realized a commonality amongst them was that many had lost a parent, some had lost both. Many were living on the streets or even in potential domestic violence situations. And every single student I met had some story of trauma, death, and loss. And yet out of those over 2,000 students that I met, there was one girl who really stuck out to me, and her name was Celia. Now, Celia and I, we were pretty similar in age, and we hit it off immediately. We became very, very fast friends, and about a week into our trip, she actually said, do you want to come to my house? And I said, yes, that would be amazing. I would love that so much. And so we went to her home, and my heart fell, because that was where I really understood what it meant to live in poverty. Because you see, Celia's home was a cement brick room smaller than the size of my bedroom. The roof was a couple of pieces of old rusted tin with holes in it, held down by some string and a couple of rocks. Inside, the entire family's belongings consisted of an old, dilapidated chair, a singular mattress, and a couple of cups and plates, all of which Celia shared with her mother and her 3 younger sisters. Just outside of the house was Celia's family's bathroom. It was just a bucket with a couple of sticks holding up pieces of plastic that they'd found from the rubbish for privacy. Just next to that was Celia's family's kitchen, a pile of coals and a singular pot. And yet for me, that wasn't the most memorable part of the day. For me, that moment was actually when we went back and we sat down with Celia and we asked her a very typical question you ask a 14-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I did not expect what Celia responded with, because Celia just burst into tears. And I remember after a few minutes, she composed herself and she started talking about how if she could just graduate high school, Then she wanted to become a judge so that she could help the people within her community. Again, my principal's words came to mind. A life well lived in some way involves service to others. Now, a couple of days later, we actually found out that Celia was about to become one of the millions upon millions of girls every year who's forced to leave school. And for Celia, the reason why was because her mother could no longer afford to feed her family and pay Celia's school fees. Imagine a mother having to choose between starvation and giving her children an opportunity out of poverty. When I came home, I knew I had to do something. And so I started a small social enterprise. Admittedly, it wasn't anything extravagant. It was just a small art competition with the goal of raising enough money to put Celia through the rest of high school. I am very happy to say that we made more than enough for that. And Celia actually graduated last year and has just this year started her first year at university for nursing, which is pretty amazing. I am so proud of her for being able to make it that far. And I think she definitely does deserve a round of a clap, and I try and give her one as many times as I possibly can. Because for a girl from her beginnings, that's truly an admirable achievement. And I think that she deserves all the praise in the world for everything that she's done. And I am so proud to have been able to be there with her along that journey. As you probably noticed, Celia has had a bit of a change in direction from wanting to be a judge to becoming a nurse, but despite that, she's actually already started to use her opportunities that she's gotten through her sponsorship program to actually start making impact within her own community. And she does that through a micro-business that we helped her establish. Now, at that micro-business, essentially what we do is we sponsor pads here in Australia, and then we send them to Celia, and she redistributes them to girls within her community. Now, the women in the room will know a reusable pad's probably not too difficult to come by, and it might not seem like much of a big deal to us. But to the girls in these developing nations, it's a very, very different story. Because you see, these girls are currently using leaves, they are using sand, they are using oats, all very unhygienic tools to help deal with their periods. So that accessibility to a menstrual product is completely life-changing. And again, I am so proud of the impact that Celia has had, because to date she has managed to help provide the solution to over 72,000 periods through her efforts to make education more accessible to girls within her community. And she hasn't stopped there. She also works from an education angle. She has a very special apron that she wears that actually has a diagram of the female reproductive system. And she wears that when she redistributes the pads because she wants to make sure these girls are educated about their bodies, about their reproductive health, and about their general hygiene. Now, we all know that educational equality is important and that education directly results in more opportunities. But similar to the pads, being in a classroom offers so much more than just that for girls in developing countries. Because not only does the classroom empower her to take more control over her life, something which is stripped away when they aren't allowed into the classroom, but it also allows them to have more stability and to learn really crucial life skills. But most notably, it also gives them protection from exploitation. And if we are able to educate more girls, and if we are able to give them more chances in the classroom, it is very, very possible that we could see developing countries all over the globe slash their poverty rates and simultaneously completely improve their social and economic standing. I want you to think for just 1 second about how if those 130 million girls were given the same opportunities as Celia, what type of things could they do with that? We could quite literally cure cancer. We could halt the march of COVID-19. We could create a world where humanity is at the forefront of every new policy. We need to start educating our women because educational equality is so very important. And this isn't just me saying some fancy ideal for how I think the world could be changed for the better. There's statistical evidence that is backing this up. A recent study has found that each additional year of education that a girl receives directly correlated with a decrease in child mortality rates by 9%. On from that, those additional years of education result in a 20% increase in a girl's income opportunities. Those are some pretty hefty figures to consider. And quite frankly, I'm sure you'll agree with me, it should be criminal for these countries not to invest in their women, because it doesn't just stop there. If women were given more opportunities in agriculture, for example, they could see an increase in food production from 2.5% to 4%. Educational equality matters. And you guys can create impact. And it's so important that we do, because we need to stop relying on these external parties to fix this problem for us, because they're not. Because it is up to each and every single one of us to take that crucial step forward and take that action. Celia has shown us that it's not impossible. She has shown us by simply existing that it is so possible that we can create this impact if only we extend a hand. And you guys can help. I promise you, you can. That small social enterprise that I started, it's now grown into 3 main income streams. It has made over $200,000 worth of impact, and now funds a scholarship program which puts 14 amazing young girls through high school all the way until university. And while I started in 2018 with 1 girl, I started with Celia. By the time I was 14, there were 4 girls in that program. By the time I was 15, that number was up to 9. Now at 17, I'm working to bring that number to 14. That is over half of a typical Australian classroom. And really, who am I? I'm just a kid from the Gold Coast who saw a problem and has known that I can make a difference and has taken that step forward to make that impact. And you can too. So please, if you take anything away from my speech today, know the power that each and every single one of you holds within your hands. Because it is time to get our global community to work together. Because what my principal said is true. A life well lived in some way involves service to others. So let's walk out of here today and let's go and change the world. Thank you very much.